Hey everybody, ready to talk about coffee plants? That's right, we're going to talk to you guys about growing coffee plants, particularly coffee Arabica. That's the #1 coffee sold in the world. And you know, if you are up to the challenge, you can grow a coffee plant almost anywhere. Now this plant right here is about 4 years old and it is loaded with coffee. Okay, in this container I have a coffee Robusta, and in this container also a coffee Robusta. These are seed grown. And this is coffee Arabica. One of the things that you need to know about coffee Robusta is that it is a lowland variety of coffee. It contains much more caffeine, and it's only about 30% of the supply of coffee that's produced in the world. On the other hand, Arabica is a much better quality coffee, not as harsh, does not contain as much caffeine. It is self-pollinating, where your Robusta requires cross-pollination. It's important to keep in mind that coffee Arabica tends to be a coffee that's grown at high elevations, as opposed to Robusta, which is, as I said, low elevation. What I have discovered though is that Arabica seems to do fine here in Florida, and we're practically sea level. So, you know, when they tell you that the coffee must be grown in a certain environment, you know, that's not always true. So we are growing, and I have many friends that grow coffee Arabica here in South Florida. As a matter of fact, I have people up in St. Petersburg and Tampa that grow coffee, and it's tough up there because it gets pretty cold, but they still figure out how to do it. One other thing I wanted to point out to you guys is that nutrition is super important for these plants, and in a minute I'll show you the coffee plant that's in the larger container, and I'll show you the coffee beans, and I'll explain a little bit about that. All right, if you want to grow coffee, there's a couple of ways you can do it. You can do it in the ground, or you can grow it in a container. This particular tree is just about, actually almost 6 foot tall, but it's a little lower because it's in a pot and that elevates it. You've got coffee all over this plant. Okay, it's loaded with coffee. Now, from the time that this coffee set flowers to the time that these beans begin to turn red and are ready to harvest, it took about a good 9 to 10 months. That's how long it takes to get this coffee to be ready for harvest. One of the things you're going to notice also, if you look carefully, is that there's a ton of coffee on here that's green that should not yet be picked, and then there's some that is beginning to ripen. And that means you have to start to think about beginning to collect this coffee before the red ones get spoiled, because then you can bring disease to your plant. So it's a lot of work to grow coffee. When you have a coffee plantation, you literally have to get out there with your team, and you have to constantly be picking and picking and picking all of those ripe berries to then get them out to market. Next day, you got to go back out and clean up those berries again. So it's a long-term process of getting those berries into a basket and then out to market. All right, so how do you get the absolute best looking or best producing coffee plant? It's really a matter of understanding some basic stuff. Number one, your soil pH is very important. 5.5 to 6 on average would be great, okay? If you go into a higher pH level where it starts to get above 7, then you get nutrient deficiency problems. And on the next plant, I'll explain what I mean by that. Now, when you go ahead and get any plant and you want it to really be healthy, a lot of times you'll hear people talk about the soil food web, and they talk about mycorrhizal fungi. I think it's really important for a container plant to have a good soil food web in it, and that's not always so easy, but a good way to get it started is with the mycorrhizal fungi. I'm going to show you guys, this bag here contains about almost a pound of mycorrhizal fungi. Mycorrhizal fungi is basically part of the soil food web. It is going to create a relationship between the roots and the fungi that's going to really help the plant to absorb nutrients. So it's very important to consider this. It also helps to protect the plant from diseases of all different types. One of the things that you also want to get, and to get that mycorrhizal to really colonize that root zone, is you want to get some quality biochar. Biochar creates a dynamic environment for the mycorrhizal. It gives the mycorrhizal a place to colonize and live and spread out all over those roots. It provides some nutrition, but most importantly, it helps to retain soil moisture around the roots, keeping them healthy and providing the mycorrhizal a really, really good place to live. When it comes to your fertilizing, I know a lot of people believe in using their own compost, and that's great. If you've got great compost and it's got all the nutrients that your plants need, then by all means, use your compost. There's a lot of times when you don't have that luxury of actually having the great compost that you are creating in your yard, and in those cases you sometimes need to go out, and I do like to go out and get from time to time, besides the compost, some acid-loving fertilizer for my acid-loving plants. One of them that's really good is this one here, and it's a 644. Okay, it works great. It's basically got bone meal, fish meal, all kinds of good stuff that breaks down in the soil. One of the real big issues with coffee is a lack of potassium. And I'll show you what that looks like in a minute, and I'll also show you some other nutrient deficiencies that are important, that are also related to the pH of the soil. This is a product that's a soluble seaweed. It's a 0017. That means it's loaded with potassium. And I like to mix this up and use this as a foliar feed for my coffee plants. And when there is a potassium deficiency, this will correct it very quickly. It's very important to have good potassium levels for your coffee plants. Another big problem with all your fruit trees, and in particularly big problem for coffee, is they get scale and they get ants and they get aphids from time to time. And you want to keep the ants away, because the ants can actually cause a lot of problems. They actually protect the aphids and they protect the scales. So if you can keep the ants off the tree, you minimize the amount of scales, aphids that are going to be able to survive and thrive on your trees. This is called tanglefoot, and this is basically an insect barrier against ants. And you take this and you brush it onto the trunk, and I'll do a video about that in the future, but you want to check that out. This is something else you want to put on your trees if you'd like to keep the ants off without having to spray a bunch of pesticides. So there you have it. You've got your biochar, you've got your fertilizers that are organic, and you've got the other three products, which was the mycorrhizal, the potassium, which comes from a good strong seaweed product, and we also have the tanglefoot. So let me show you one coffee plant, Arabica, that's in the ground, and give you a kind of an idea of some of the challenges that you could have if you're growing it in the ground. All right, so for the most part, this coffee plant's looking pretty good. We've got some really nice dark green leaves. It's growing under a canopy that is pretty much a bunch of areca palms above, but it does get a good amount of sunlight later on in the afternoon. But for the most part, it's protected, and it has that filtered light coming through, and the plant's doing great. But there is a little bit of a problem, and I will show you. I'll take off this leaf here. I'll take off a leaf back here. This is an example, typically an example of a potassium deficiency. You see the margins here? They're turning all brown along the edges, and then later the leaf will turn all yellow. That's a potassium deficiency. Okay. You also have this type of chlorosis right here, where you see the yellow and you see the veins. Now, that's an iron deficiency, and that is usually caused because of the pH of the soil is too high. Because this tree is planted in the ground and it's very rocky and it's very, very high pH soil, it's challenging for me to grow the coffee plants on my property in the ground. When I planted this tree, I did not amend the soil by adding a whole bunch of organic material to the soil that would have lowered the pH. I didn't do that. But I have done that to 3 other trees that I now planted a few days ago towards the back of the property, and they're looking much better. If you have an iron deficiency, you can fix it by lowering the pH of the soil, but that'll take a long time and a lot of work, and it's very difficult to lower the pH of the soil in the ground. So typically what you would do is you would spray with a foliar, or you would do with a drench with like a chelated iron. So you would put iron, and on all of these leaves that are deficient, you would soon begin to see a big improvement in your tree. Your tree would look so much better. All right, so now down here, I'm going to come down to the bottom of the tree, and I'm going to show you guys something that's very important that you do to your coffee plants, and that would be to prune these suckers. You see this branch that's growing up straight here? Straight up. This is a sucker, and this is going to drain the plant of energy because it's going to aggressively grow, sucking the energy away from the plant, and the plant won't produce very much when it comes to coffee. And the plant won't produce efficiently. You'll get very little coffee if you have a lot of these suckers, and also the overall growth of the main stem of the tree slows down. So we want to remove them, and you would come on in there and remove it and get those guys out of the tree. Okay, now because this tree is a kind of a weird tree because it has a big split Y here, and I really should have never planted it, but I did, and primarily planted it to kind of figure out how it would grow, what would happen. And over the years, what I've done is I've removed these branches that are growing inwards to kind of keep this canopy open and get sunlight in. But this plant has not performed well at all compared to the ones that are growing in the containers. As I said, I've got to constantly hit it because of these nutritional deficiencies, and I've gotten much better results growing them in containers. But me being the guy that likes to experiment a lot, I have now planted a couple, like I said earlier, in the ground, and I really amended the soil. So I'm hoping that things will work out really well. There's a good example right there. There's a good example of a potassium deficiency. So this guy's been very challenging, and I wanted you guys to see that. Now back here I have 3 coffee Arabicas that were planted just about a week ago. I have 1, 2, and 3 over here. These guys are doing good, but they were growing in containers, and they're loaded with coffee, doing very well. And as I said, it's getting kind of dark right now, so it's going to be a little hard to show you everything. But they're planted, and what I did is give them a lot of peat and a lot of pine bark, all mixed in with the soil, plus the mycorrhiza, plus the biochar, and I think we're going to do great. But I'm worried that over time, because of this pH challenge that I have, I'm going to have a rough time with a lot of nutritional deficiencies. And this plant, as I said, really requires a lot of phosphorus. So I do give it a lot of foliar feeds in order to keep them healthy and strong, and it seems to work really well. So this area, I just actually took out 3 large areca palms that were here. So there was 1, 2, and 3, and I had to dig those 3 of them out and get rid of the stumps. It was quite a job, but now I have this area actually looking pretty nice, and I'm pretty sure that my coffee plants are going to do terrific. The only thing I have to fear is a very heavy cold snap, because if these guys get hit anything down into the low 30s, above freezing, but nevertheless in the 30s, these plants are going to suffer like crazy. And if it gets real cold, they could even die, or at least die back as far as the base of the tree, and then I got to wait for them to grow back before I get coffee again. So that's one of the challenges of growing coffee in a climate that's not ideal. But it's a challenge. It's kind of a bit on the crazy side, but it is fun. And I hope to do my next segment on actually harvesting the coffee and making a cup of coffee, tasting it, and telling you guys, can you grow good coffee here in Florida or not? We're going to find out. Hey, thanks for coming by. I appreciate it. Check out some of those products if you think you'd like to use some for your plants. They're good stuff. I have a link below. And if you like the video, give us a thumbs up. Appreciate it. Subscribe to our channel. And better yet, hey, why not share the video and let some other people know that, Pepe's here at the YouTube channel. Thank you. Have a great one.